Hey, what's good, y'all? Got a new vlog for you today. And this has to be one of the more important ones that I wanted to get into. I don't want this to go on for too long, be long-winded as hell. I mean, when it comes to having a lot on the brain, having a lot on the mind, it's the type of thing that you want to be able to have a conversation with anybody. It could go on for an hour, if not a couple hours. It doesn't matter. Hell, it could be done on a podcast for that matter. You know, podcast has been all the rage to get into longer conversations. But for a video like this, I don't want it to be long-winded. I just want to make my point for what I want to talk about real quick. And this is just meant to be a broad stroke of what I'm talking about here, and this is what I want to say. With everything that's been going out here in the world, that's been going on out here in the world, I should say, excuse me. What's been going on with me, what's been going on with you, what's been going on with everybody. We all are going through it. It's just a matter of how we handle ourselves in the long run. Especially for those of us who trying to put the work in to establish that part of our lives. Especially when we want to do better for ourselves from how we were in the past, right? Because it's easy to point out how we got people out here who tend to be stubborn, stuck in their ways. And so they're getting in their own way from progressing, from being better, from getting better, from doing better. Based on the words, the actions, the choices, the decisions that comes with this one life we have, right? I feel like it's important to bring this up. And even if I've already brought this up on more than one occasion, sometimes repetition, it does help in the context of this. You know, speaking of the long run, in terms of thinking of longevity, thinking of what can you do to make things right? What can you do to make things better for yourself? And that goes for each and every one of us. And it's like, the one time repetition really helps is that. Mantras, reminders. Because without that being embedded in us, we're going to backslide. Because we have the best parts of ourselves and we have the worst parts of ourselves. And if we tend to lean into the worst parts of ourselves, we start to become the very darkness that's in us, but it takes over us. Because then we start to indulge in that and continue to make things worse out here in the world instead of making things better. And that also means us towards each other. Despite our differences as people, as human beings, regardless of whether or not we got status, we are all people. We are all human beings at the end of the day. How we treat each other is the give and take effect. It's the give and take scenario. What you get is what they receive, and vice versa. What you see is what you get. The energy you put out into the world, that's what you get back. Treat people how you want to be treated. Or if you treat people the way you shouldn't have, the only way that's reciprocated is you taking on that very negative outlet on constant battles, battle after battle after battle. Only way things get worse is when we're not progressing, we're regressing. The thing about life, the thing about us, is that it isn't always going to be the left or the right. It isn't going to be black and white. It ain't always going to be that. It ain't always going to be who's wrong and who's right. There's always going to be the middle ground. Somehow, some way, there's going to be the middle ground, the gray area. What's in the middle of all of these things that we're dealing with? If we're talking about making something competitive or making a debate about these things, I mean, if we're going to talk about competitive aspects of it, in terms of entertainment, right? If we're talking about making things competitive through entertainment, or we make a debate about things when it comes to, well, especially when it's the political side of things. And as of late, what we've been dealing with this time around, especially this year, it seemed like the previous years has been it was the warm-up. It was the warm-up. This year has been nothing but heat. Right? If we're talking about competition, if we're talking about debates, if we're just simply talking about differences between ourselves, it's always something about us that is gonna lead to these discussions that becomes confrontations. It was the build-up for the crescendo that ended up becoming what this year ended up being. And of course, more years to come. This right here has been the year for beef. That's pretty much the point that I was getting towards with this one right here. This year has been the year of beef. The year of the back and forths. The year of the team-ups against one person or teams against teams. Opinions versus opinions. Facts against what's said to be facts. Lies and the truth. This year has been an all-time high for all of that. Regardless of who's the winner, who comes out on top, this has been the year for all of these things that took place. You know what I say to that? I say that for us, we're complex and complicated. That's how I look at it. Complex and complicated. Because I always tend to think about how we have these aspects about us that can contribute to something good within society, within the world itself. But then we have the parts of ourselves that tend to spill out at the worst moments. Therefore, It's not just battles. It's wars we're fighting. And we're going against each other for that reason. And because we tend to go against each other, what about fighting the bigger fight? What's the bigger fight? Besides us fighting each other, it's ourselves. That's how I see it. That's how I look at it. It's ourselves. When we fight each other, that's us projecting onto each other. Projecting ideas, thoughts, opinions, facts that at times tend to be weaponized. Trying to prove who's wrong and who's right. Who's left and who's right. What's the black and the white? But then, what about trying to find the middle ground? Mining for them gems that really puts a stamp on how we should look at each other, how we see ourselves, how we see life in general. Because it's one thing to be entertained by the bullshit, but it's another thing when you think about coming to terms with the reality. There's but so much escapism for any of us, for all of us. Because the more we do that to ourselves, the more we drown in that. Slowly but surely, we're killing ourselves. If not, we're offing ourselves quickly. The real battle, the real war is us. Individually. It's us. That's the bigger fight. We could be at war with each other, which is a horrible thing to think of. But it continues to happen. But it's really ourselves. We might as well be at war with ourselves. We're at war with how we identify ourselves, how we perceive ourselves, how we think about ourselves. We're at war with ourselves. And then we project onto each other, which makes situations go from bad to worse, instead of good to better. What we should be doing is trying to make the best of understanding why we're at war with ourselves. That's what we should be doing. But for those of us who tend to get stuck in our ways, who tend to be stubborn about it, right? That's what continues to perpetuate everything we're dealing with right now. Especially when it comes to those specific kinds of people who can't handle the truth. Especially when it comes to them. When it's the truth about them. Because then for the rest of us, that's actually trying to make sense of it. We have to deal with the pushback that comes with it. We have to deal with our own pushback that comes with it. How do we handle ourselves with this kind of information, with these kinds of thoughts, with the facts, and then the opinions that come into play? How do we handle ourselves with all of that? Do we accept the truth about ourselves, or do we allow ourselves to be manipulated into thinking otherwise? I feel like this right here, this entire year, says a lot about us as people. This entire year says a whole lot about us. Whether you agree with me or not, that's how I look at it. That's how I see us this year. Who knows what's going to happen next? But right now, that's how I see it. That's how I see it with us. You, me, everybody. Complex and complicated. Right now, that's the truth we all have to face. But in terms of how we handle that truth, in terms of how we go about the rest of our days, it depends. It depends on how we think, how we speak, how we move out here. But you see, I might as well have been going on and on and on about it right now. I didn't want to make this video too long, but I just felt like in order for me to really get my point across, I had to let all of my thoughts out. So regardless of how long this video is going to be, it is what it is. Because I'm always going to have a lot to say. I do that with my poetry. I do that with any and every conversation that I actually have. It's always a lot to think about, and there's always a lot to say. So, with that being said, I just want y'all to marinate on that. Because, of course, who am I to say these things if I don't do that myself, right? I'm going to marinate on this as well. Because that is something to think about. It is a lot to think about. Like I said at the top of this video, it's a lot that goes on in the brain. It's a lot that goes on in the mind. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to say. But I feel like the important thing about this video, the important thing about having any and every conversation we can possible to be able to speak freely about how we feel on these matters, well, especially for those of us who has these conversations, and it doesn't get heated, it doesn't get overheated, that it's an understanding between us. It's important to know that we hear each other out, despite our differences. It's important that we hear each other out and acknowledge that. Because if we don't, we're only going to perpetuate things to get worse than what they already are, than how it already is. This whole entire year has been the Coliseum of battles, man. But the ongoing war that continues to happen, the ongoing war, and I ain't talking about on the surface of things, even though we are dealing with that. But remember, it's us. That's the real war we're fighting. It's us. With that being said, this is BlueFlamez Da Poet, and I'm out.